Hello, my name is David B. Lyons, and I am the author of She Said, Tree Said. Now, well, first off, let me say when I say that title, I know an awful lot of my readers are based in the US or in Canada or in the UK. And when those Irish people pronounce TH words such as tree, which is in my title, we have a hard TH sound. And I know it sounds funny to an awful lot of my students when I'm talking about creative writing, but so don't judge me when I say She Said, Tree Said, because that's how I pronounce it. But listen, thank you so much for downloading this video, and thanks a mil, there it is again, thanks rather than thanks, or whatever it is the Brits and the Americans say. Thank you so much, more so, for reading She Said, Tree Said. I hope you enjoyed the read. I know it wasn't a very easy sort of theme or plot to write or to read. It certainly wasn't easy to write. I know I gave you some heavy duty themes there to sort of think about as you were reading, but I really hope you enjoyed the ride and the process of the storytelling. I hope you found it enjoyable, but I also hope you found it controversial, and I hope you found it ambiguous, because ambiguity is sort of the one area I was trying to reach when I wrote the whole 85,000 words of this story. Ambiguity, just leaving so many questions, because that's really what happens in rape trials. But now that I've been asked to do this Q&A, I'm pretty sure the questions that some of you may have after reading the book could be answered here today. So why don't we get straight down to the questions? Let's see what question number one is, please. What made me come up with the idea? I thought I was going to be answering questions about the characters and stuff. But what made me come up with the idea? Well, to be honest, there's been an awful lot of high profile, including celebrity, rape trials, whether it's in Ireland or in the UK or in the US or all around the world recently, which is a good thing, because these rape cases are now being brought to the court and so many don't make it to trial. So it's actually a good thing that we're seeing a rise of them in courts. Obviously a bad thing because these horrible crimes are occurring. But it's where I came up with the idea for it, because so many were happening, and it wasn't that I wanted to necessarily write a rape court case novel at all. That was never even in my mindset, and all the ideas that go on in this bald head, that wasn't something that ever came up. But I've been reading about these trials, and I find the ambiguity to them really disheartening, and I have to give credit to my wife, because as I was reading about these trials, there was a couple of major ones happening between 2017, 18, 19. I told my wife I wonder what's going on inside the heads of these jurors as they're deliberating these trials, and I thought maybe I should write a book about it. And when I came up with the sort of concept of setting it inside the jury room, and so we could get a sort of inside perspective of what happens at these trials, I thought, yeah, it's not a bad idea. I would like to write about this ambiguity and all these sort of grey areas when it comes to these type of trials. I just wasn't sure I could do this type of story justice. I didn't think I was the man or the person to write this story until I did a rough first chapter, and I passed it to my wife. And I never pass stuff to my wife to read. She doesn't necessarily read my books, but she does read my books, but she doesn't read early drafts of them. But for some reason I felt I needed her to read it, and when she read it, she loved it, and she said, you have to write this story. And I did write this story. So yes, it is inspired by the raft of trials that have gone before it, whether they're in Ireland, England, UK, America, Canada. I know America has had an awful lot of celebrity rape trials, some sports stars who have been to court over these types of cases. So I wanted to get that across. I wanted to get the reality of the courtroom across in the story, and that's why I came up with the idea for it. Oh, well, I mean, that's not necessarily a question I should answer. I think that's a question each individual reader should answer. Did you hate Jason, Zach, and Lee? My thoughts on it are, well, one, I created these three guys, and I mean, when it came to coming up with the idea, initially it could have been a movie star or a TV actor or a musician or any other sort of type of celebrity, and I wanted to be a celebrity because I wanted it to be a high profile trial. I wanted the general public to be engrossed in what was going on in this trial. But the reason I came up with footballers was because I wanted to get across the ambiguity more. So I thought if there was three guys, it would create more grey areas. And I also wanted to get across, forgive me men, I am one of you, I wanted to get across that sort of immaturity that men carry when we're in packs, and I'm guilty of it. When we're out with our mates and there's 2 or 3 of us or 4 or 5 of us, we do revert to being little immature shits, and that's what Jason, Zach and Lee are. But individually they're probably all sort of reasonably nice guys, but in the pack they have, they start, the book starts off with them cracking your ma jokes, slagging each other's mothers, so they instantly show a disregard for women pretty much early on. But how seriously should we take that disregard for women? Because, I mean, hands up, I have cracked your ma jokes, and I was cracking your ma jokes, you call them your mother in America jokes, when I was in my 20s, and I was hanging out and going to pubs, and in fact I went to pubs and clubs that are mentioned in this book. But I wanted to paint on that immaturity, but that's because they're together. But are they that immature individually? So, I mean, if we take Jason, and you're supposed to hate Jason, he's a Christian, he goes to mass, he prays all the time, he is a footballer who's adored by thousands of supporters and fans. There's probably posters of him in certain people's bedrooms, but he earns tens of thousands of pounds a week, and yet he complains about his life. He's not happy in life, he's depressed. Are we supposed to like him? Did he disrespect his ex-girlfriend? Did he disrespect Sabrina? I guess, all of these questions are up to you to decide, not necessarily for me to decide. I painted Jason on as I saw him. Zach is a different kettle of fish. Zach blatantly does disregard women. He disregards his wife. He cheats on her at every given opportunity, and by cheating on his wife, he's also cheating on his children. So there's definitely reason to dislike Zach. He's also really sort of bitter. He's a bitter person because he didn't make it. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't a famous footballer. His best friend ended up being that, when it was sort of Zach's dream all along. And then he gets mixed up in the wrong crowd because he doesn't know what career to take, so he ends up drug dealing. So there's an awful lot of black marks against Zach, and I guess the question is, are we supposed to dislike these characters? I guess the obvious one to dislike is probably Zach. Of course, he sort of really is the catapult for what happened that night with Sabrina, because it was he who sort of suggested to Jason that, come on, why don't we try this threesome thing? So he catapulted it, but oddly enough, he was the only one that did not end up having sex with Sabrina that night. So there's reasons to hate Zach, definitely, I would say. Lee, on the other hand, is devoted to his girlfriend, soon to be fiance, who is having his child. He has full respect for his mother, full respect for his sister, full respect for his soon to be fiance, as I say. All round nice guy, doesn't have an ego, doesn't carry the vanity or the bitterness that Zach and Jason carry, isn't depressed, has a focus in life, has a career, has his little apartment. Nice guy up until we find out that there is no ambiguity with regards the claim Sabrina made against him. Now, she made a claim against all three of them, but there's no ambiguity at the end. Lee did in fact have non-consensual sex, therefore raped Sabrina at the end of the book. So it was the nicest guy in the end that turned out to be the nastiest, and of course we sort of had hint of that Lee had this sort of small Nazi streak in him because he, of course, is the one most responsible for the hit and run on Caitlin Tyrrell all those years ago. So there's reasons to sort of like and dislike each character, but even though I created these characters, I don't think it's fair or right for me to decide whether you should or should not like them. I think that's up to each and every individual reader. Yeah, a good 20 years after the hit and run. So there's a few reasons why Caitlin ended up being one of the jurors, and in fact, I wrote about 7 drafts of this book. It took a long, long time because I wasn't getting it right. I wasn't getting it right early on, and Caitlin wasn't a juror then. But the backstory of the secret was intertwined within the narrative. But one of the reasons I wanted Caitlin as one of the jurors was simply to sort of give off the reason or the reality that there's such a small pool of people that you have to choose from in Dublin when it comes to these court cases, and the coincidence that it would be somebody related in some way to one of the accused is by no means a stretch of the imagination. In fact, very often the jurors are dismissed because they know somebody who's in the court case. So the reason Caitlin is there is no coincidence at all. But I also, not only did I want to get across the fact that it's a small pool of jurors that we have to choose from in Dublin, I also wanted to sort of give Caitlin justice, her story justice. And I wanted you, the reader, to sort of catch up with where she was in present day, as opposed to just a story you heard 20 years ago when she was knocked down and almost left for dead, I guess, by these 3 guys. So now we know she is in a wheelchair her whole life. She is in a relationship with another guy who's also in a wheelchair. She's happy. She is now part of this jury. And I just wanted to give you an update on how she was doing. But also, on top of that, I thought it would be really, really touching if Caitlin was part of the jury, and particularly touching if she was the one who, in the end, persuaded those who were hanging on and not giving a not guilty verdict. I thought it would be quite sort of touching to have her persuade them into a not guilty verdict, and her to set the ball in motion to really end this trial and end this trial in a not guilty verdict. Completely unbeknownst to her, of course, that the 3 men she was judging were responsible for her being in that wheelchair. But the thing about the jurors is, I wanted to get across that these are 12 ordinary people, and Caitlin, of course, being one. And these ordinary people are who decide these types of major trials. It's not legal experts, it's not judges, it's not lawyers. It is 12 ordinary people. And here we have, somebody who works in a supermarket, we have somebody who works in an insurance company, we have an ex-politician, we have a security guard, we have men and women, we have people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s, people from all sorts of walks of life within Dublin. And that's why there's 12 chapters in this story. Each one of those chapters describes, it has a little bit of background and detail information on each of the jurors. And I just wanted to get across that these major trials, murder trials, rape trials, kidnap trials, these big, big legal questions are not answered by legal experts. They're actually answered by or judged by ordinary people like me and you. And I just really, really wanted to get that across in this story. It was part of the whole narrative. I needed to get across the fact that these big trials are judged by people like you. Well, I think I answered this question a little bit in part when discussing the 3 male characters early on. We sort of questioned them as we see the night in question sort of played out through the book, and we're wondering who we trust, who we like. Um, but absolutely, I wanted the ending to be ambiguous. And the reason I wanted the ending to be ambiguous is because that is the word that kept coming into my mind when I was researching different rape trials in order to write this book. Everything is ambiguous when it comes to rape trials. So if you take, for example, this story. We take She Said, She Said. Yes, Sabrina is claiming the boys had non-consensual sex with her. They are claiming they had consensual sex with her. And if that is the defence and the argument, well then, knowing whether the sex was actually consensual or not consensual is very, very, very difficult to judge, because the only people who will ever know are the people who were in the room that night. So ambiguity, grey areas, that is the major theme of this book. Also, I mentioned throughout the book, and it's I don't know how many times it's mentioned, but it's repeated almost through every chapter, the phrase lack of evidence. And that is because if there is sexual relations admitted from both sides, well then where is the evidence in rape trials? Where does it come from? And that is why, sadly, we have the statistics that end up in the back of my book. It's the sad reality of this type of trial. Yeah, just mentioning them, they're absolutely 100% real. This is the saddest thing about this story. And it's one of the reasons I kept writing this book, and I wanted to write this book, is because I wanted those statistics at the end of the novel. That's the true story. It's depressing and it's sad, but unfortunately it's very, very true. The Jason, Zach and Lee versus Sabrina court case, which is painted through my novel, is a genuine mirror reflection of an awful lot of court cases and rape cases that go on. Yes, at least one of the men definitely raped Sabrina Dial, but all three men are acquitted. This is what happens. I'll repeat the statistic at the end of the book. In 92% of cases, it is believed the claimant is not lying when they accuse people of raping them. They're not lying. 92% are not lying. Yet only 18% of rape court cases ever end in a guilty verdict. Those maths don't add up. Those maths don't add up at all. And let me just zoom in on those stats a little bit more. 18% of those that make it to trial end in a not guilty verdict. But most of the rape cases don't make it to trial. Yet 92% are believed to be not lying when they accuse somebody of raping. The maths don't add up, and the maths don't add up because, and I'll say this word again, I know I'm repeating it a lot, but it is everything about this story. The ambiguity. How are people like you and me, who would be on a jury for this type of trial, how are we ever supposed to find the evidence? There's bound to be ambiguity, and that is why, unfortunately, only 18% of those accused of rape ever end up in prison because of that claim. Those statistics, alarming as they are genuinely the true reason I wrote this novel. I knew this question would come up. What do I think happened to each character? Well, the truth is, an awful lot of these characters dealt with low self-esteem, at least maybe even depression, before this story started. So this story begins with Sabrina going into the Hairy Lemon pub, and then a few minutes later the three boys entering the same pub. That's where it begins. Before that moment, before four of those set foot inside that pub that night, an awful lot of those characters were dealing with low self-esteem or depression. So if we take Jason, for example, yes, he was this celebrity footballer, adored by thousands of fans, lots of money, big house, but he was not enjoying his life. He was coming towards the end of his career. He had all this adulation, but sort of it didn't mean anything to him. It was intangible. He didn't like being a footballer. He didn't like being in the dressing room. He didn't like that sort of banter. He had finished with his girlfriend. He was living a life of depression, which a statistic which I also mentioned in the book, 38% of footballers, when they come to the end of their careers, end up with severe cases of depression, which is another alarming statistic. So, given that Jason was depressed before he was accused of rape, and given that Jason had consensual sex with Sabrina in the hotel room that night, so he doesn't feel as if he's guilty in any of this, and whether he is guilty in some regards is totally up to you. It's most likely that now Jason is suffering highly with his depression. He will have finished football. His court case is ended. Yes, he was acquitted, but it's not likely that Jason is a happier man now than he was before he walked into the Harry Lemon pub that night. It's similar with Sabrina, and to me, a sort of sadder case with Sabrina. She was dealing with a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-worth, a lack of self-confidence. But she was just sort of building it up. She'd got this new career where she was an entrapment girl for this girl, Lorna. And this was sort of giving her some confidence. She hadn't had much confidence up to this. She had been burnt by trying to be a model. But given that she was sort of working her confidence levels up, and then this happened where she was raped, and she genuinely feels that she was raped by all three men, because she was discombobulated in the hotel room that night. She wasn't sure at certain stages who was having sex with her. She assumed all three men were in the room at the same time. She didn't want this to happen. She said no. She said no 3 times, and somebody was still penetrating her. So she believed she was raped by these men. Given that she had low self-esteem beforehand, it's likely that Sabrina is also still suffering today. And of course she would feel all the worse because the men who she accused of raping her got away scot-free. And this is a sort of a theme I wanted to get across in this book, is that very often the accuser, and it's mostly women, very often the accusers of rape end up being a victim again of sorts, because they're scrutinised. They're scrutinised in the courtroom, they're scrutinised by the police when they're being questioned. Suddenly the tables turn and the pressure's all on them, the spotlight's all on them when they are the innocent party. So it's really, really, really tough for, of course, anybody to go through this sort of experience. But given that Sabrina was sort of brittle as it was, it's unlikely that she has come out of this any better. But Sabrina is the embodiment of an awful lot of women who have been raped, and whose rape cases managed to go to court, and whose accusers managed to get away scot-free. To move on to Zach, well, Zach is probably the most unlikable of all the guys. Cheats on his wife, cheats on his kids, wanted to have sex with Sabrina even though he hadn't had any sort of nods or invite in any way from Sabrina to have sex with him. So he's also a drug dealer as well. He's caught up in Dublin criminals gangs. So he is the most unlikable, yet he's still the only one who didn't necessarily have sex with Sabrina that night, as much as he manufactured the whole thing. But given that he has cheated on his wife in the past, given that he wasn't necessarily the happiest man anyway, I don't think much would have necessarily changed for Zach. I reckon today he could conceivably still be with his wife, still living with his wife and kids, still probably cheating on her, still probably selling drugs, still wrapped up in Dublin's criminal gangs. I don't think this case would have changed Zach as much as it would have changed everybody else. It certainly would have changed Lee. So Lee has lost everything. We know this from the story. I mentioned it made its way into the story. Lee's fiance dumped him. Doesn't necessarily get access to his daughter, who had been born after the night in question and before the trial. He would have lost his apartment. He would have lost basically everything he was living for. And he would now probably be in a state of depression, much like his best friend, Jason. But Lee will deserve this more than anybody else, because let's not forget, Lee, as likeable as he was throughout most of the story, he's responsible for Caitlin being in a wheelchair, and he definitely, explicitly raped Sabrina Dial on the night in question. So none of the four are going to be in a better place than they were necessarily before the night in question. But this again is true to the facts, because this is what happens to both the accused and the accusers of rape cases. Nobody's going to come out of it glowing, as much as some assholes might come out of a court case, and I've seen this, fists pumping because they got acquitted of rape. Their life's not going to be better because of this accusation. So all four characters, what happened next? They're all likely to be in some sort of state of depression caused by the trial itself. Well, this book is the first book of a new trilogy, so I'm going to write 3 books based inside courtrooms. They're going to be 3 different courtroom dramas. So it's not necessarily tied into the TikTok trilogy, which are my first 3 books, but there is a crossover character, Alan Keating, who is the criminal gang boss. He appears in Midday and Whatever Happened to Betsy Blake, and is mentioned in the Suicide Pact and here in She Said, Tree Said. So he sort of makes his way through my novels, yet he's always sort of a shadow lurking in the background. But yeah, I'm hoping to have my next book, which is a follow-up to She Said, Tree Said, out sometime in the spring. That is going to be a court case based around 2 young girls, a set of twins, who are accused of murdering their mother and father. And I'm enjoying writing that. I have to say, it's not as tough a write for me to undergo as She Said, Tree Said, because She Said, Tree Said was more raw and real, and I had to do some really sort of damning research to get this book out, whereas this is a bit more of a fictional tale, which is all coming from this bald head of mine. Excuse me. So that will be called The Curious Court Case of Fate and Grace, and that'll be coming sometime in the spring. Hopefully, I've still got deadlines to meet for that. But it will be, another court case which will be told from the point of view of one particular juror who, I don't want to give too much away, but we'll see it through her eyes as she examines the case, and I think it's really good. I'm very excited about it. Oh, so that's it. That's the questions done. Well, listen, thank you again so much for reading She Said, Tree Said. I hope you liked it. If you did, please leave a review on Amazon. I'd be very grateful. All authors, no matter whether you're a low life like me or in the high life like Stephen King, love a review on Amazon. So please make your way there if you can. Other than that, please check out my website, theopenauthor.com, where you can get information on all my novels, upcoming and past. So again, thank you so much for downloading this video. I hope to see you in another video for The Curious Court Case of Fate and Grace real soon. Thank you.